Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is John Picaver. I'm one of the co-founders of Sweat Equity Alliance, Sea Change, and we're really looking forward to this event. So thank you for joining us for historian Dr. Alison Rose Jefferson's presentation, Reinstating Black California Stories from the Jim Crow Era into South Bay Histories of Los Angeles County and the Implications of These Stories Today. Dr. Jefferson is a publicly engaged independent historian and heritage conservation consultant. She earned her PhD in history from UC Santa Barbara and her Master of Heritage Conservation degree from USC. Dr. Jefferson has worked extensively across Los Angeles and the Southern California region to elucidate and recenter the African American experience in regional history, heritage conservation efforts, civic memory, and the American identity. Among her current projects, she is guest curator on the Black California Dreamin' Claimant Space in America's Leisure Frontier exhibition, which is on display until late summer at the California African American Museum at Expo Park. Most of us here learned about Dr. Jefferson's work from her book, Living the California Dream, African American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era, from which we learned about the history of businessman Titus Alexander's attempts to build an African American leisure site at the beach in El Segundo during the 1920s. Dr. Jefferson will stick around for a few minutes after the event for book signing, so don't miss that, please. And then prior to that, we'll have a Q&A after the presentation. So without further ado, Dr. Jefferson.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction. And I'm so happy to be here today to share with you all. And I was so happy to learn that El Segundo had its own library. I was like, wow. It's not a county library, so that makes you guys really special in terms of thinking of the importance of education for your community. So my work as a publicly engaged historian and heritage conservation is a social, and can everybody hear me? Am I speaking loud enough? Okay, thank you, since the mic isn't working. So my work as a publicly engaged historian and heritage conservation consultant is a social justice action practice to expand knowledge for construction of a more inclusive public culture, historical memory, and national identity encompassing the diverse experiences of the American people to dismantle institutional racism. Today I'm going to share some once forgotten stories I've reconstructed and reinserted into civic memory through various programming modes, including my recent book, which you heard the title of, Living the California Dream, African American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era, and the exhibition at the California African American Museum, and other work that I've done. And these stories of unrecognized voices, economic development initiatives, civil rights struggles add new information and understanding about how African Americans seized their California and American dreams to appropriate and shape the offerings of their new environment in the far West. These stories recapture and recast the significance, meaning, and places by recognizing African Americans' agency, leadership, and action, therefore giving a more complex understanding of the American experience and identity in the West and California, where racial discrimination existed in practice rather than legal prescription, as in many other states of the nation in the post-enslavement modern capitalist era. By contrast to the city where Black Angelenos lived, California waterfront and inland rustic places that flourished for different time durations between 1900s to the 1960s, where they went to find joy, relaxation, and invest in real estate, included in Los Angeles County, Bruce's Beach in Manhattan Beach, Santa Monica's Bay Street Beach area, sometimes controversially called the Inkwell, Eureka Villa in Santa Clarita Valley up in northern LA County, and in Riverside County, Lake Elsinore and Corona's Park Ridge Country Club. And then there were a few other places as well, and one of them we'll talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about some of them that I didn't mention as we go forward. 3 places I'm going to talk about tonight were in the South Bay region in the early 20th century, where African Americans attempted to invest in developing residential and recreational opportunities outside of Los Angeles city limits in Manhattan Beach, El Segundo, and Torrance. And I will discuss the impact of these stories and how today, in some instances, they are being used for society's betterment. African Americans began moving in large numbers to the Los Angeles environs in the decades surrounding the turn of the 20th century, joining a multi-ethnic community that included whites and people of color, as well as immigrants of many national backgrounds. The majority of new black migrants relocated from California's southern states. Their stories are about public and private memories of African Americans of all socioeconomic classes. The new Negro who migrated to the United States northern, midwestern, and far western parts in the post-World War I decades to escape the worst of Jim Crow era racist, anti-black restrictions, and racial injustice. These migrants were more self-confident and sometimes militant in demanding their rights as citizens and consumers. Similar to other groups who moved to the state, African Americans also embraced the recurring booster-promoted California dream of a lifestyle in picturesque outdoor settings, a mild climate, and new life opportunities, even while discrimination and lax enforcement of California's civil rights laws established as early as 1893 many times prevented them from using various public or private facilities and buying land in many areas for decades into the 20th century. Despite these challenges, African Americans actively participated in California's development through the early 20th century Great Migration. They bought homes and other property, raised families, launched businesses, created social and faith institutions, nurtured a rich cultural milieu, that included the emergence of West Coast jazz, R&B, and the gospel music scene. Black Angelenos challenged the era's white supremacist conventions about social and residential space as they asserted self-determination to participate in popular leisure and resort cultural, social, and economic trends that were considered to be modern by the 1920s. In ex-urban communities, African Americans bought property so they could control their enjoyment of these activities and contest anti-black racism. Particularly, they were challenging prejudice and power of whites in the labeling of African Americans as laborers and as inferior. In 1912, entrepreneurs Willa and Charles Bruce purchased Pacific Oceanfront land to create a resort service business that became known as Bruce's Beach between 26th and 27th Streets in the city of Manhattan Beach. The Bruce's establishment and the area became a very popular gathering place for African Americans of all socioeconomic classes on weekends and in the summertime. Other African Americans bought land and built cottages nearby. After years of white supremacist harassment, which started from the day the place opened, and after these tactics failed, this historic beach site was taken away from African Americans in 1924 by the city of Manhattan Beach through the use of eminent domain to force black property owners to leave, purportedly to create a park. These racist-inspired measures eliminated black residential and social economic development with attempts to erase the site's memory from history. Only through political assertion has a limited revival of the history of Bruce's Beach and its incorporation into the public record emerged in the first decades of the 21st century. In their first organized civil disobedience protest actions in the region, members of the Los Angeles branch of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, in 1927 challenged Manhattan Beach officials when they tried additional measures to make the beach white only. Although the Bruce's Beach community was destroyed when NAACP members staged a swim-in for which they were arrested and fined, through legal maneuvers, clarification was won that African Americans had the legal right to enjoy this and all California beaches. This was an important civil rights and beach access victory, not just for African Americans, but for all Californians. In the coming decades, with this accomplishment, African Americans' more confident assertion of their legal rights contributed to racial restriction attempts by whites at state public beaches fading away. As the 20th century advanced, African Americans around the U.S. would increasingly utilize legal actions and public protests to dismantle legally sanctioned, along with informally informally enforced discrimination and segregation practices in public accommodation. So they would protest. That was going to be a vehicle to fight for their rights at that point in time. So the park was finally constructed in the 1950s. Fast forward to 2007, Manhattan Beach renamed the Pacific Oceanfront site Bruce's Beach to recognize the Black American pioneers who recreated as they attempted to build wealth through real estate investments and to forge community. And fast forward to 2020, new energy arose to reclaim the important marginalized California ocean coastline history of African Americans, place of joy, freedom, struggle, community building, and economic development sabotaged during the Jim Crow era. Bruce's Beach became recognized by the public in new, visible ways as a site of conscience, reflection, healing, and pilgrimage at this time when racial inequalities laid bare by the long history of injustice that led to the death of several African Americans and other people of color. During this time, the idea of the Bruce's family land being returned to their descendants reemerged with a heightened sense of urgency. The descendants of Will and Charles Bruce got their land back in 2022 from Los Angeles County, and then sold it back to the county for $20 million. In this justice for the family, state and county elected officials opened up new ways of thinking about how to redress and recognize the legacy of social injustices done to African Americans that had not been fully explored in the past. New signage and artwork is in the works, and is going to join the Land Give Back to make the broader public more aware of the accomplishments of early 20th century African American pioneers who, in spite of challenges, took action to develop part of their Californian American dreams around beach leisure culture that would define modern Southern California identity and spread across the nation. The commemorative and social justice actions at Bruce's Beach recognize that African Americans have a right to historical and cultural sites, a place in the American identity, and the joys of cultural expression, self-fulfillment, and wealth development, along with claims, the right to clean air, clean water, and the enjoyment of all of American resources. These moves are a good thing, but we must think more deeply about the events of 100 years ago and their legacy. The restitution needs to go further to provide tangible collective benefits to all of the purged African Americans of all classes who were chased out of Manhattan Beach, that lost out on a vibrant socioeconomic cultural space where today in that city they make up less than half a percentage of the 35,000 people who live in the city. For broader social justice to occur, our elected officials need to, and our community needs to be committed to implement innovative public programs which encourage African American cultural, socio-economic attainment opportunities in Manhattan Beach and at other California beaches and beyond. During the 1920s, the Bruce's Beach community and its visitors were not alone in facing legal sanctions and private harassment actions discouraging African Americans from visiting and settling in particular beach locales as the region's population increased. Several Save the Beach campaigns were implemented to keep African Americans from creating or maintaining beach resorts at multiple California beach towns. At Bruce's Beach, as Bruce's Beach was being forced into closure, another beachfront area for African American enjoyment was proposed. An enthusiast for fishing and hunting as well as visiting various California nature sites, Titus Alexander proposed leasing a 200-foot shoreline area near what is now the Hyperion treatment plant in El Segundo on land which had been owned by the city of Los Angeles since 1892 for a new beach park for Black Angelinos to use. Civil rights and civic activist, businessman, and self-proclaimed literary tramp, Alexander was born in 1870 in Helena, Arkansas, to parents who had been enslaved. The youngest of 7 children, before migrating to California in 1897, Titus Alexander attended Oberlin College in Ohio, the University of Michigan, and Ohio's Case Western, what is now known as Ohio's Case Western Reserve University. It was said in one newspaper article that Alexander arrived in Los Angeles as a Pullman train worker. In his early years in the far west, he also worked in mining in Nevada for a few years before he permanently settled down in Los Angeles, where he worked in real estate, other business, and a variety of civic engagement endeavors. He was actively involved in many Los Angeles organizations in the Black and greater city communities with such civil rights groups as the Forum, the NAACP, the Urban League, as well as being involved with the Outdoor Life and Health Association. He was involved with the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce as well, and involved in other organizations. He fought against the Ku Klux Klan's insinuation into the region, and he was a leader in fighting to end discrimination by public institutions. One of the fights he led for Black Angelenos in 1913 was a protest to the city council against infringement on their constitutional rights, as well as the humiliation they suffered from the practice of proprietors of movie theaters, saloons, and restaurants raising the rates for service for Black people in order to keep them from patronizing these establishments. An ordinance was asked for to make these practices a misdemeanor. Additionally, the protesters demanded the establishment's licenses be revoked if they were found to be in fault for discriminatory practices. A devout Catholic, Alexander was a Democrat who was highly active in the party's local, state, and national committees, where he held many important offices before the New Deal, when most Black people were still supporting the party of Lincoln, even after the Republicans had abandoned their progressivism. He ran for seats on the City Council of Los Angeles in 1921 and 1923, and for the California State Assembly in 1926. Although he lost these contests, Alexander had the endorsement of influential figures of the era. He pressed the Democratic National Convention as early as 1920 to include in the party's platform positions against segregation and to support federal aid to education in the party's platform. He helped to fight for municipal ownership of public utilities in the long battle to defeat private powers' interests in these ventures. As part of this fight, Alexander became a civil servant in the business division of what we call today the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, where he would work from 1926 to 1940 when he retired at age 70. Alexander had a responsible post and was one of the few African American employees at the time to work in non-manual labor positions at the department. Always looking to live his California dream and fight for equity, with a white partner, Alexander bought 11 lots on the west side of Los Angeles at LaSalle, north of Exposition Boulevard near Western. This is just a little west of USC for those who may not know the streets. In 1913, he built a home for himself and his wife, Mary, and on one of the lots, and then he sold the other ones exclusively to African American buyers. So as I was doing this research, I realized that my godmother, Moselle Ector, lived in one of those houses eventually built there. And I visited her there during my lifetime when she was alive and I was alive in the 1960s to the 1990s. And I also happened to mention this to the actor Roger Guinevere Smith the other day, and he said, "Oh, my aunt lived on that street too." And now she lived there later than, he doesn't know when she moved there, but he remembers visiting her there in the 80s. And so I was just like amazed when I, read that. So a sought-after speaker, Titus Alexander was recognized as an authority on the African-American experience in the West and the American story generally. He created a collection of books and papers on the African-American experience, which he gave to Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company to be used in a library available to the public. A member of the California Historical Society with great knowledge of early California history, Alexander collaborated with Los Angeles City System librarian Marion Matthews on the research to aid artists Hal Woodruff and Charles Austin to create graphic historical accounts of California from its earliest days, with depictions of pioneering black citizens in 1949 for the lobby of the new home of the Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company on Adams at Western Avenue. So back to El Segundo. The Los Angeles City Playground Commission and the Title Guarantee Trust Company obtained an injunction to prevent the Los Angeles City Council from fulfilling a lease agreement with Alexander for this shoreline property. The plaintiffs alleged the lease arrangement for 15 years was at a low rental rate and was an ill-advised handout to a private concern. In their argument, it was noted this proposed lease was tantamount to privatization of the beach and promoted segregation, because white people would not have access to 200 feet, to a 200-foot section of 400,000 feet, 65 miles of Los Angeles coastline. You understand what I said? Okay. Although Alexander's El Segundo beach lease was eventually denied in 1925, in this era, local governments were also beginning to buy up and maintain oceanfront properties to assure public access of a public and important California resource. This public ownership would evolve to become another important civil rights and beach access victory for African Americans and all Californians. So I want to note that numerous white-run civic and business groups in Santa Monica Bay and otherwise supported the racist interference actions against black developers' beachfront ventures, not only in El Segundo and Manhattan Beach, but also in Santa Monica. Other beach resorts suffered similar fates, with the most violent intimidation campaign carried out by whites to evict African Americans from enjoying the beach, with destruction of the nearly completed Pacific Beach Club in Huntington Beach. Arsonists burned the beautiful new facility to the ground shortly before it was to open in 1926. Even though the Bruce's Beach Enclave and Alexander's proposed project were destroyed and thawed, respectively, African Americans continued in their attempts of ex-urban, sometimes high-profile real estate development and community building ventures in Los Angeles County's South Santa Monica Bay area and other Southern California locales. They also continue to use the beach shoreline space, mostly in northern Santa Monica Bay places. Dr. Wilbur sees as one way to use his personal agency to push African American civil rights, wealth development, and equal access to consumer culture of the era. The fearless and ambitious white, an investor in real estate and other business ventures, joined Gordon and several other black Angelenos intensely interested in development of locally controlled and carefully executed financial investments, which led to the economic renaissance of black Los Angeles in the 1920s. As racist antagonists had done to the Bruce's Beach Resort enclave in Manhattan Beach a few years earlier, a group of very wealthy white Angelenos who owned mansions and sizable ranchette estates in the Palos Verdes hillsides, several miles south of the Gordon Manor project, convinced the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors in 1926 to condemn the subdivision's land to build another park. This was another attempt to keep black Americans out of the South Bay. After many years, Gordon Manor eventually became El Camino College, Alondra Park, and the public golf course that we know today. While the blatant efforts to dispossess African American citizens were taking place in southwest Los Angeles County, Dr. Wilbur C. Gordon and entrepreneur Jerne W. White pressed on with other business ventures, including other land development projects in Southern California. And you can learn more about their exploits and these places when you read my book and visit the exhibition on this topic at the California African American Museum. Like many white Americans, black Americans were lured to California for its opportunities and the good life imagery produced by writers, painters, photographers, and movie makers, which were used by various boosters promoting migration to the state. The stories and imagery of African Americans who participated in various phases of the Western migration and settlement continue to remain largely absent from the dominant mythologies and history surrounding Western migration. The stories I touched on today elucidate the diversity of the black experience in the larger complex world of the American West and the American identity. They show the expansion of the nation's democratic tradition through African American struggle and contestation for freedom, equality, and rights as citizens and consumers, and agency in making their own history along with California, Western, and national American history. So I hope that you will take time to learn about these forgotten black Western pioneers and ponder the implications of their stories for our lives today by buying and reading my book, Living the California Dream, African American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era, and visiting the Black California Dreaming Claiming Space at America's Leisure Frontier exhibition that I curated and is on at the California African American Museum now until August 18th of this year, and also by visiting some of these places that I've described and that are visually illuminated in the works. So thank you very much for your if you have any questions, comments that you want to offer into our conversation today.
I'm not 100% sure when the red car was available, but do you think that was part of what brought people to the area because there was good public transportation down by the
Certainly,
beach?
that is what brought people to the area. So Manhattan Beach really didn't start developing until they got the streetcar and the train coming down there. And that would have been the same, more or less, with El Segundo as well. There was a refinery that was, perking up around that time, but it would have still been difficult to get here because at the first 20 years of the century, we don't have the car online in the way that we have it online now. And it was dirt roads, and you still had the horse and wagon as a big part of your transportation. So yes, the streetcar made it much easier for people to get down here. So with the Bruces establishing their place down there, they probably, in Manhattan Beach, they probably looked around, and that was the place where they were able to buy the land, because there was nobody there, okay? They had been trying to buy beachfront land in Santa Monica, and even in the time period that the Bruces were starting their resort, there was a black resort that started in Santa Monica, La Bonita, but it was like 2 blocks from the beach. And then in 1920, 22, African Americans in Santa Monica did get some beachfront property at Pico and the oceanfront where Shutters is today, and they were going to develop a resort there. And they had a big protest from all the white people that were there in that area of Santa Monica, saying they didn't want, and the businessmen, like Bundy, okay, and Culver, okay, and they didn't want them to build this resort there. And it was actually Culver's father-in-law who had done the deal with the black folks he did a lease buyback deal with them. So they were going to build this resort. The white folks protested. The city council up there said, no, you can't do anything more than have a house on the land. So for the black folks, that wasn't useful. So they let that project go. So Manhattan Beach and El Segundo, these were places. There was an African American community in Venice, but Venice had a resort area, okay? And so you couldn't get on that ocean front. You could work in it in some cases, some businesses, or you could have your own businesses, but that community in Venice was really, in the early part of the century, was part of the Santa Monica community. It was like a neighborhood, okay? So it was part of the Santa Monica community. If you walked from Pico and Fourth down to the center of the African American community of Westminster and Fifth, it's like 2 miles, 3 miles, something like that. It's not that far. You could, walk. I've walked it actually, but so Jack, your question? Yes. He had the same.
Were you able to collect, outside of your family members and the actor that you spoke with, were you able to collect oral histories from anybody in your research?
Oh, yeah. So in terms of a lot of the material that so when we say oral histories, we're talking about the descendants of the people who would have really been using these sites. And I didn't start this research until, I started this research like 2004. So my mom was dead by then. She was the family historian. She died, she was 67, she had cancer, she died in 1995. Okay, so I'm starting this research. So then I'm like, oh, let me ask my uncles about this. So I did. I asked them about things, and they had some things to say. And then there were people of their generation who I was aware of, who their families had been here since the turn of the century. And then I went and talked to them. And then they told me to go talk to so-and-so, and go talk to so-and-so. So I have lots of photographs, I had some in here
Yeah.
that are from private collections. And they're not collections that are in the public. They're like this photograph. Nobody has this photograph. The family has it, okay? And the picture of the Tabor family that was in there, I'm doing research on Venice, and I'm like, oh, what you got? And that family, they got a lot of pictures. The Reese family, they are early families that moved to Venice. Another family in Santa Monica, so I didn't really talk about Santa Monica today, but the first African-American church in Santa Monica was formed in 1906, and they got their first building in 1908. The first minister of that church was James A. Stout. When he moved to Santa Monica, he came with 3 generations of people. He came with his wife, his daughter, and his mother-in-law. That family still has residence in Santa Monica. The matriarch is 80 now, and they have pictures. And she grew up in Santa Monica. She left in the 50s. But this is Christine Lawson. She left in the 50s. Her father lived there also all of his life. Her mother and father divorced when she was a little kid, and her mother moved to Los Angeles. Her mother was a musician, and she taught, she wound up by the 1960s teaching at Cal State LA in the music department. But she didn't like Santa Monica because it was too small. There was nothing to do, and they wouldn't hire her as a teacher either. She went to Santa Monica College as well as USC, but they wouldn't hire her. They didn't hire the first African-American teacher, and it was a man, until the mid-1950s. So, so with that, what I'm saying is, like, Christine has lots of stuff, and I've used her work. If we were, if I had talked more broadly about the research that I did for the book, I would have had some of those images to share. But I have images of Lake Elsinore from private collections. And so, like with my family, they went to Lake Elsinore. I have no pictures of them at Lake Elsinore. But I got all these other people's pictures. Okay. And so, yes. And so, oral histories, yeah, I did some interviews, but it's not really oral history in the sense of these experiences so much, because they were too young. They were catching it on the tail end of what was going on, and they were children. And so what they know about it is more what they heard from their parents and what they may have done in terms of research.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, sorry.
Oh, I got a question that might be a bit silly, or fine, I don't know. I was just wondering why the family ended up selling it back to the county at Bruce's Beach.
Well, I don't think it's silly. I mean, it's just, you know, it's a question. So they sold it because they don't live here. None of the folks that were the descendants that inherited the property, they don't live here. And there was nothing they could do with the land. Okay, it's zoned for public use. The lifeguard station, the lifeguard headquarters is there. And okay, so if they held on to it and what have you, and they thought they might be able to develop it, that would have been, you gotta have the skills, first off, to be a developer. And that would have been like a really long thing that would have happened. Then, so aside from so this county owns that particular piece of property right now. But then you have to deal with the Coastal Commission, and you would have to deal with the city of Manhattan Beach in terms of any kind of change that would be going on with the zoning stuff there. So I just don't, I mean, I didn't have a conversation with them about it, but I mean, just knowing all the, I mean, a lot of people were like, well, they shouldn't have sold it, but they're not understanding what is going on. You know, some people, I said to somebody one day, they were telling me, well, they shouldn't have sold it back. I said, have you ever been down there? And they had never been down there. They don't even know what the area looks like. They only know about it from the news. They've never walked down there, you know, to understand the dynamics of what that park is, of what the portion of the Strand area that we're talking about is.
And the tax bill alone.
Tax consequences.
Yeah.
Well, they're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
The county gave them a break. The state,
Uh-oh.
Federal.
and that too, yeah. So somebody, they still working that out, from what I understand. I haven't talked to the family directly about this, but just from what I understand, they're still working all that out. But they don't live here, okay? They don't live here. They didn't grow up here either.
Hi, thank you for your talk, that was fantastic. The Titus Alexander stuff was some things that I was researching back a couple of years ago, and I was wondering, do you know if he has any descendants?
No
Okay.
children.
So he had no children, that's what I gathered.
He had like, and when he died, he was the last of, he had a sister that was still alive, but everybody else was, in terms of his siblings, were dead, because he was the youngest, remember that, he was the youngest. So there were some cousins and their descendants. There was a nephew that I ran across in terms of, he had ID'd some of the pictures that are in the collection of Golden State Mutual Life Insurance at UCLA. But I didn't delve into that, but he didn't have any children.
I'm curious about your work process, and when you're gathering all this data, how do you stay organized and how do you approach it whenever it's time for you to start cataloging everything and turning it into your book like you did?
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So, I mean, you know, you have your kind of idea about the story that you're looking for. I mean, there was some story that I had in terms of the oral histories of these places that I dealt with in the book. And so from there, then I just started to look around to see what else I could find. So I started this research in 2003, 4, that time period. So times have changed in terms of some of the research things. Like, I can find all kinds of newspapers in newspaper.com that I couldn't find, okay, in 2004. I could find them, but I would have to go and sit in front of the microfiche machine, okay? Right, exactly. I have to go and sit in front of the microfiche machine. The California Eagle, which is the African American newspaper of record that we have available, because there were others, but that's the one we have available. And we have some of the Los Angeles Tribune too. So with that, it's now online, and it is indexed now in newspapers.com. It was online with archives.org, the one that's attached to UC Berkeley up north. And it had this wonky indexing thing in there, but it was there. But you had to go through, all these It was just tedious, so it's not as tedious. So it's really kind of, you get the basic story of what it is, and then you just start adding, as you find things. I mean, like for El Segundo, for example, I had kind of I had a little bit of the story, and there's not a lot of information because it didn't happen to last that long, okay? So, I had, I knew Titus Alexander had been involved in it, and I had done some research on him before, but I did more research when you guys asked me to do this talk. And it was like, I found some things that I hadn't seen before on him. And then the Golden State Mutual Life Insurance archives are available now. They weren't available before. So, then you just add some things. And so I was telling Anya that, we all had thought that Titus Alexander was a lawyer. Well, he wasn't a lawyer. He was just mentioned in 2 newspaper articles as being a lawyer in 2 early civil rights battles. I think it was the LA Record newspaper. And that's where people got that he was a lawyer. And then Douglas Fleming, who wrote Bound for Freedom, he had it in there. So, it's additive. You get pieces of information, and then you
Start weaving it together.
Yes, yeah. And then, you have to also think about whatever your overriding framework is, that, why you want to talk about these things. And so I was interested in African American history in terms of Los Angeles, and I was interested in migration, and I was interested in business development. And these leisure sites happen to be a way for me to get to all those stories. And I'm also interested in place and the whole mythology of the California dream. One of my professors when I was in graduate school at USC working on my master's was Kevin Starr, who wrote the California Dream series books. And he actually was the person that encouraged me to do this research, because I had to do a paper for his class, and I went to the TA and I told her my ideas, and she was like, why don't you go talk to Kevin? And so I had one idea of looking at Miller in Riverside, who built the Mission Inn, and comparing him with Ian Schrager, a contemporary boutique hoteler. And so Kevin Starr was like, everybody's already done that. And then I had the idea about these black leisure sites, and he's like, but nobody's done that. And that was, I was interested in that, and it was like I wanted to do something that that was meaningful to me, and so that's, that was great encouragement from him. Yes, sir.
Yes, so in addition to the story of Titus Alexander, El Segundo in the not so recent past, in the more recent past, was known as a sundown town, and many of the deeds to houses here have racial covenants. Of course, they're no longer enforceable, but they would restrict houses to only white people, essentially, unless the non-white people were indentured servants. And certainly a lot of progress has been made since then. We'll talk to people who are like, well, that's in the past, why talk about that now? I think it really needs to be spoken about, but can you elaborate on how that history shapes our present today?
Well, it shapes our present today because the community has less than, what did we say, less than 3%?
7%?
Yeah, 3%, percent of population is people of African American descent. 16%-ish, right, of the community is Hispanic, okay? But those are things that impact your community in terms of what these covenants did. in terms of the people that work in your city as well, the employment patterns were impacted by that as well, because, you know, people couldn't get housing. They couldn't get housing, therefore they couldn't, you know, work in the area. If they were, you know, if there was a job here, say in the 1950s, and the freeway wasn't around, it wasn't easy to get here. So all of these things impact our lives today, and people that choose not to recognize that, they have chosen to think about society in a different way in terms of, you know, yes.
Well, it was much worse in Manhattan Beach, actually, because, well, there was a black neighborhood in Manhattan Beach, but it was wiped out, as you pointed out. But today, there are 35,000 people in Manhattan Beach. The number of black people is 193.
Yeah. So,
and everybody says, I mean, if you tell, well, the property values are so high, and, you know, blacks can't afford to live there, and that it just kind of happened, you know. And no, it didn't just happen. It was engineered and done very
right.
deliberately
Right.
with restrictive covenants and, you know, segregated housing.
well, even if it wasn't that the restrictive covenants were on the land, because in some places there weren't restrictive covenants, but they just wouldn't sell to black people. So, and black people wouldn't want to live in certain places because they weren't welcome. It's like Manhattan Beach, once they chased the black people out of there in the 20s, even though they were still trying to go there to the beach, after a certain point, it's like, why do I want to come down here to Manhattan Beach when these people are not going to be nice to me? There's no place for me to go to the bathroom. I can't buy a sandwich. You know,
Yeah.
I have to worry about my car if my tires are going to be slashed. And I have no backup because this police department down here is not going to be supportive of me. So they go other places.
Yeah, I should tell you the story. My grandfather, who I think was in the early 1930s, he had retired from the army and he had money, and he bought some property in Manhattan Beach because people were buying beach property as speculation and so on. And he bought this property, and within 2 or 3 months, he was told that the sale was illegal because of restrictive covenants. And
When was this?
This was in the early 1930s.
Okay.
And he was told he had to sell immediately or have the land returned
Right.
to the person who he bought it from. So he had to sell it, and he couldn't hold on to the land.
Okay, he just gave us our 5 minutes, so does anybody else have any other questions? Does anybody want to buy a book today?
Yes.
I have it.
Thank you all. So if you want to take a picture of the information about the exhibit, I have that here. And then I have some postcards about this project that I did in Santa Monica, the Belmar History and Art Project, which is at 4th and Pico. It's an outdoor installation. It's an essay that's online and lesson plans about the African American beach culture experience up in that area. And then, you know, there's a new museum, the Venice Heritage Museum, and I'm on the board, and they just opened, the museum just opened. We have a really great exhibition up called This Is Some Place, and so here's some information about that, and then some info on the museum. And the books are $35.
Dr. Jefferson, we'd like to thank you for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much for all the information. And just as we close up, as a reminder, we've got the Juneteenth event this Saturday at Rec Park from 12 to 6. And then we've got a Pride event on Pride Sunday, June 23rd. Location and time still to be determined.
It's at Rec Park 10 to 2.
Rec Park 10 to 2. Thank you guys very much for your time. Really appreciate it.